In the tapestry of human existence there are threads of joy and threads of sorrow. In the ancient town of Capernaum, a man named Jairus was living this truth. He was a leader, a man of standing in the synagogue, respected by his community. He understood rules and order, faith and tradition, but none of that could prepare him for the kind of fear that now gripped his heart. His only daughter, a bright light in his world, was slipping away from him. She was just 12 years old, on the very edge of becoming a young woman, a time of promise and dreams. But a terrible illness had taken hold of her, a fever that no local healer could quell. The air, thick with the scent of herbal remedies and the quiet hum of worried whispers. Jairus would watch his daughter's chest, looking for the gentle rise and fall of her breath, each one seeming shallower than the last. Her mother would be by the bedside, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth, her own face a mask of silent anguish. Yet, the shadow in the room only grew darker. The vibrant energy of a 12-year-old girl had been replaced by a fragile stillness that was almost too much to bear. This wasn't just a sickness, it was an assault on the very foundation of their world. For Jairus and his wife, this child was their future, the laughter that filled their home. He was just a father, helpless and heartbroken, watching the most precious thing in his life fade away. In this abyss of despair, whispers had been traveling through the region, carried on the wind like seeds of wonder. They spoke of a man from Nazareth, a teacher, a healer. His name was Jesus. For his daughter, he would walk through fire. He would humble himself before anyone if it meant there was even a chance to save her. With a resolve born from utter desperation, Jairus left the suffocating silence of his home and stepped out into the bustling streets of Capernaum. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows on the dusty ground. Merchants calling out their wares, children laughing, the distant bleating of sheep seemed to belong to another world. His world had shrunk to a single, desperate mission. He had to find Jesus. He finally saw him near the shore of the Sea of Galilee. A crowd had gathered, drawn to the energy of this remarkable man. Jesus was speaking, and his voice seemed to carry a weight that made people lean in. For a moment Jairus hesitated. He was about to interrupt, to break this sacred space with his own personal grief. But then the image of his daughter, pale and still, flashed in his mind. He pushed forward, his fine robes catching on the grasping hands of the crowd until he finally broke through. There, in the dust and the heat, Jairus, the respected synagogue leader, fell to his knees. It was an act of complete and total surrender. He was no longer a man of authority. He was a supplicant, a beggar for a miracle. He looked up at Jesus, his face streaked with sweat and tears, his voice cracking with emotion.
"My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so that she will be healed and live."
Jesus looked down at the kneeling man. In his eyes there was no judgment, no surprise. There was only a deep, profound compassion. He saw not a synagogue leader but a father. He saw the love and the terror warring within this man's heart. Without a moment's hesitation, Jesus gave a simple nod. He reached down, perhaps placing a hand on Jairus' shoulder, a silent promise that he had been heard. The crowd, which had fallen silent, began to murmur with anticipation. They had just witnessed a powerful man humbling himself. The journey had begun. Hope, fragile but real, had been ignited. As Jesus agreed to go with Jairus, the crowd surged around them. It was not a gentle parting of the ways, but a chaotic, pressing wave of human bodies. Everyone wanted to be close to Jesus. They wanted to touch him, to hear him. For Jairus, this was an agony. Every second that passed felt like an eternity stolen from his daughter. The journey to his house, which should have taken only minutes, became a slow, agonizing crawl. The path was a gauntlet of human need. People reached out their hands, their faces etched with their own stories of suffering and hope. Jesus moved with a calm that seemed almost otherworldly amidst the chaos. He did not rush, he did not push, and then, everything stopped. It was not a gradual halt, but a sudden jarring pause.
"Who touched my clothes?"
The question seemed absurd. In a crowd this thick, everyone was touching him, but Jesus was insistent. He knew this was different. He had felt power go out from him. For Jairus, this delay must have been excruciating. His daughter was on the brink of death, and they were stopping to find someone who had touched a robe. The source of the touch was a woman who had been suffering for 12 long years, the same number of years his daughter had been alive.
"It was me. I touched his cloak because I believed I'd be healed."
And she was.
"Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace."
While this was a miracle, a moment of profound beauty, for Jairus it was another delay. He stood by, a silent witness, his own hope wrestling with the rising tide of his fear. The minutes ticking by, each one a hammer blow to his heart. The journey continued, but for a father watching his daughter slip away, every moment felt like a lifetime. Just as Jesus finished speaking to the woman, a new disturbance rippled through the throng. Several men were pushing their way forward, their faces grim, their movements urgent. Jairus saw them and his blood ran cold. He recognized them instantly. They were from his household. They were not supposed to be here. They were supposed to be there, with his daughter. Their presence here on this crowded street could only mean one thing. The hope that had been so carefully kindled in his heart just moments before began to flicker and die. The men reached him, their expressions a mixture of pity and sorrow. They avoided his eyes at first, looking instead at the ground. One of them finally spoke, his voice low and heavy, intended for Jairus' ears alone. "Your daughter is dead." The words were simple, blunt, and utterly final. Why bother the teacher anymore? The world for Jairus seemed to stop spinning. Imagine the weight of those words. 4 words that shattered a father's universe. The noise of the crowd faded into a distant roar. The faces around him became a blur. All he could see was his daughter's face, no longer breathing, her light extinguished forever. Despair, absolute and crushing, washed over him. He had been too late. The journey had been too slow. His shoulders slumped. The strength drained from his body. All was lost. The advice from his servants was logical. It was practical. What was the point? Healing was for the sick, not for the dead. The natural order had taken its course. The rules of life and death were absolute. The silence that followed the messenger's words was the sound of a heartbreaking. In that moment of absolute devastation, as Jairus stood frozen by the news, Jesus moved. He had heard the words spoken by the messengers. He saw the collapse of hope in the Father's eyes. He saw the abyss of grief opening at Jairus' feet. Before despair could consume him, before the advice to give up could take root, Jesus spoke. He didn't address the messengers. He didn't speak to the crowd. He spoke directly to Jairus. His voice cut through the fog of sorrow. The words were simple, but held the power to reshape reality. He said, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Think about the power of those words. Don't be afraid. He was speaking to a man who'd heard the worst news a parent can hear. Fear was the only logical response. Yet Jesus commanded him to set it aside. It wasn't a gentle suggestion, it was a divine instruction. He asked Jairus to defy the evidence of his senses. He asked him to reject the finality of the message. He asked him to step out of the realm of the possible, into a realm where life and death obey different rules. It was a challenge, a call to a higher state of being. The second part, just believe. What was Jairus supposed to believe? Not merely that Jesus could heal the sick, he'd already believed that. Now he was asked to believe something more radical, that Jesus could conquer death itself. He had to choose. To continue to his house was pure, unadulterated faith. He clung to those 5 words, "Don't be afraid, just believe," like a drowning man clutching driftwood in a raging sea. When Jesus, Jairus, and the inner circle of disciples, Peter, James, John, finally arrived at the house, they were met with a wall of sound. The quiet, worried whispers of before had been replaced by the loud, chaotic ritual of mourning. Professional mourners had been hired, as was the custom. Their loud wailing, the shrill, sad music of the flute players filled the air. It was a public and dramatic expression of grief, a declaration to the entire community that death had claimed a victory here. For Jairus, it must have been a torturous sound. The soundtrack to his worst nightmare. Jesus paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. The house, which should have been a place of life and family, was filled with a commotion of performative sorrow. Jesus looked at the chaos, at the loud display of hopelessness, and he did something unexpected. He challenged it. He walked into the midst of the mourners and spoke to them directly. "Why all this commotion and wailing?" he asked. His question cut through the noise, causing the flutes to falter and the cries to subside into confused murmurs. Then he said something that, to them, sounded utterly insane. "The child is not dead but asleep." Imagine the reaction. These were professionals. They knew death when they saw it. The idea that she was merely sleeping was absurd, even offensive. It seemed to diminish the very real tragedy they were there to acknowledge. The sorrow and confusion in the room curdled into something else. Scorn. They began to laugh at him. It was not a laugh of joy, but of ridicule. They mocked this stranger who dared to contradict the undeniable reality of the situation. This laughter of disbelief did not deter Jesus. He did not argue with them. He did not try to convince them. He simply acted. He had them all put outside. He cleared the house of the noise, the chaos, and the doubt. He expelled the professional mourners and the scoffers, leaving only the raw, quiet grief of the family and the focused faith of his closest followers. He was creating a new space, a sanctuary free from the contamination of cynicism and despair. The stage was being set not for a funeral but for a resurrection. With the noise and the scorn banished from the house, a deep stillness settled over the room. The air was no longer thick with the performance of grief, but with a fragile, trembling anticipation. Jesus took with him only a chosen few: the girl's father, Jairus, her mother, Peter, James, John. These were the witnesses. They had been brought past the wall of disbelief. They walked into the room where the little girl lay. The room was simple. A small lamp cast a soft, flickering glow. The silence was absolute, broken only by their breathing. On a mat or simple bed lay the 12-year-old girl. She was perfectly still. Her face was pale, life drained away. There was no rise and fall of her chest. She was, by every known measure, gone. For her parents, this confirmed their deepest fears. Jesus approached the bed. No grand ritual, no loud incantations, no dramatic gestures. The audience had been sent away. This was intimate and sacred. He stood, looking at the child. His gaze held infinite tenderness, deep compassion. He was more than power. A creator before creation, life in the presence of death. He would challenge the laws of the universe, not with a roar but a whisper. He reached out and took the girl's hand, his hand warm, hers cool and lifeless. For the parents, the touch sent a shockwave, a bridge between the living and the silence of the dead, an act of connection and authority. He did not recoil. He held her hand gently, as if waking a sleeping child. The universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting. In the hushed sanctuary of the room, holding the still, cool hand of the child, Jesus leaned in close. He spoke to her directly, as if she could hear him, as if she were merely in a deep slumber. He spoke in his native Aramaic, the language of home and family. Talitha cum, he said. The phrase was gentle, almost a lullaby. It meant, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Instantly the impossible happened. A shudder of life ran through the girl's body. Color began to return to her cheeks, like the first blush of dawn chasing away the darkness of night. Her eyelids, which had been sealed by death, fluttered open. She took a breath. It was a small, simple intake of air, but it was the most miraculous sound her parents had ever heard. She sat up, her eyes blinking in the soft light of the room, looking around not with fear or confusion, but with the simple awareness of a child who has just woken up from a long, deep sleep. The reaction of her parents was not a loud shout but a gasp of stunned, incredulous joy. Tears streamed down their faces. They were tears of wonder, of relief, of a joy so profound it was almost painful. They reached for their daughter, touching her face, her hair, her hands, as if to confirm that she was real, that she was truly warm and breathing and alive. The silence of the room was broken by their choked sobs of overwhelming happiness. It was a holy moment of reunion, a family made whole again. Jesus watched them, a gentle smile perhaps playing on his lips. He then did something remarkably practical, something that grounded this cosmic event in the simple needs of humanity. "Give her something to eat," he said. It was a beautiful, tender instruction. Life requires sustenance. This miracle was not just a display of power, it was a complete restoration. The girl was not a ghostly apparition. She was a living, breathing, hungry 12-year-old. The shadow of death had been replaced by the promise of a shared meal.